The wind was the only thing that answered Elias Dunn anymore. It brushed over the hills in long, mournful sighs, like it too had forgotten how to hope. His boots left no eager prints in the snow that morning, just the tired drag of a man who'd grown used to weight, on his back, in his bones, and somewhere deeper still. The barn stood a little crooked, same as him, but it hadn't fallen yet. That counted for something. Elias pushed the door open slow, not to spare the hinges, but because he moved like someone who no longer expected surprises. The frost on the beams glittered faintly in the early light, a soft and brittle beauty that didn't ask to be noticed. He didn't notice it. He set down his sack of feed, tugged his gloves tighter, and crossed to the mule stall. The leather bridle had split again. He crouched and began the careful work of mending it, fingers stiff, the silence around him thick as wool. It was the kind of quiet he wore like a second skin, peaceful maybe, but never warm. A rustle broke it. Not the kind an animal makes. Not a mouse or bird. This was slower, human, hesitant. Elias stilled, the bridle hanging like a forgotten sentence from his hand. He rose to his feet with caution, not fear, and turned toward the hayloft. There, curled into herself under a threadbare wool blanket, lay a woman. For a moment, nothing moved. Not him, not her, not even the air. Time hung like breath caught in a cold throat. She was asleep, though her body didn't look like it had been rested in weeks. Her clothes were dusted with road dirt, her boots cracked and nearly falling apart. One hand clutched her belly, a belly round with child, and Elias felt something jolt inside him. An ache so sudden and sharp it nearly made him speak aloud. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her face was pinched by winter's grip, but there was something gentle there still, like the last flower surviving in a snowed-over field. Her hair was the color of old honey, tangled and dull, but clean. Someone once had loved her. Maybe still did. But they weren't here now. Elias stepped back without a sound and sat on the nearest bale of hay, watching her as if from a distance. He couldn't cross even if he tried. The barn smelled of cedar shavings, cold air, and something older, loneliness maybe. He didn't know what she was doing here, or why. But the ache in her posture told him everything that mattered. He thought about waking her, about demanding an explanation. It was his barn, after all. His hay, his blankets, she'd taken without permission. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. If she was sleeping here, she had nowhere else to go. And he, God help him, knew what that felt like. Instead, he rose and moved quietly to the small stove in the corner. He kept it there for emergencies, and this felt like one. The fire was slow to catch, but he coaxed it to life, added water to a kettle, and set a tin cup beside it. When the woman stirred at last, hours had passed, and the light through the slats had turned gold. She didn't startle. That surprised him. She simply blinked, sat up slow, and gathered the blanket tighter around her belly. Her eyes swept the barn, then landed on him. Wide, wary, green as pine boughs under snow. He nodded once. Not a greeting. Not really. Just something to say, I see you. Her voice was hoarse when it came. Didn't mean to trespass. He said nothing. Just poured her the coffee when the kettle began to whistle and handed it over without meeting her gaze. She took it with both hands like it was something sacred. She drank slow. Let the heat wake her, maybe. After a while, she said her name. Annaliese. No last name. No explanation. Just that. He told her his, Elias Dunn, and returned to the bridle, hands working though his mind did not. She watched him quiet. He could feel it, her eyes like touch. But she didn't ask questions. Didn't fill the space with talk. He liked that about her instantly. The wind moaned outside again, low and bitter. Annaliese's face tilted toward it like she could understand its language. He wondered if she'd spoken to it too, once. They didn't speak much that day. She slept again. He fixed the hinge on the stall door, brought her a heel of bread and a bit of butter wrapped in wax cloth. She took it with a nod. No thanks. It wasn't rudeness, just weariness too deep for manners. That night, as he locked the barn and made his way back to the cabin, Elias found he was thinking not about how she got there, but what she had lost to end up in a place like this. A barn in the dead of winter. A stranger's kindness, her only shelter. She didn't ask for it. That, more than anything, made him want to give it. The next morning, she was still there. Sitting up this time, eyes open and clearer. Her coat hung open, revealing the full curve of her belly. She noticed his gaze, but didn't cover it. There was no shame in her, just tired acceptance. She spoke before he could. "The man I came for. He took one look and told me to get back on the train. Said he ordered a wife, not a burden." Her lips barely moved. Her voice was like wind over gravel, thin, worn. But she held herself upright, spine straight, hands firm around her belly. Defiant in the softest way. Elias said nothing. He didn't know the right words. He never had, really. His father used to say he spoke more to horses than humans. Elias reckoned the horses probably liked him better anyway. He handed her a small tin of stew. She ate slowly, savoring each bite like someone who didn't know when the next would come. When she finished, she said something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. "Didn't think anyone would let me rest. Not without asking what I was worth." He met her eyes then, really met them. Saw in them the kind of sorrow that didn't scream, didn't beg, just sat in silence, waiting for someone to sit beside it. "You can rest here," he said. He didn't say for how long. That night, he didn't sleep either. He lay in his cabin, the fire low, eyes open to the rafters. The wind howled again, but softer this time, as if it too was watching. He saw her in his mind's eye, curled in his barn with the child of another man inside her, and felt something in his chest begin to loosen. Not pity, not desire, something else. Something like recognition. She had arrived like snow in spring, unexpected, unwanted by some, but quietly beautiful in her persistence. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one thing. He didn't want her to leave, and that would change everything. The storm came in soft, like a secret. It touched the prairie with light fingers at first, cool mist rising from the earth, frost gathering in the corners of windows like forgotten lace. The sky were the color of old pewter, and the wind began to hum low, like a hymn only the desperate knew by heart. Annaliese sat in the loft, wrapped in the same wool blanket that had hidden her the first night. The barn was warmer now. Elias had lit the stove again, and the scent of cedar smoke mixed with hay and horses and silence. She didn't speak. He didn't ask her to. They moved around one another the way weather moves around mountains, slow, inevitable, and without rush. She watched him often, though never with boldness. There was something about the way he worked, with quiet purpose and no need for praise, that made her chest ache. He fixed what he could, left the rest in God's hands. She had learned to do the same. That morning, he brought her a cup of tea and a coat. It was his mother's, he said, old but warm. He didn't say anything about how thin her shoulders looked under the blanket or how she winced when she moved too fast. She didn't thank him, but she did put it on, and he counted that as something. Later, while he hauled water from the well, Annaliese found the letters tucked in a wooden crate by the stove. Dozens, maybe more, all sealed, none sent. She didn't open them, though her fingers lingered on one that had no name written on the front. The handwriting was blocky and careful, like someone who didn't write often, but wanted to get it right. When Elias came back in, snow beginning to crown his shoulders, she didn't mention the letters. Just asked if she could help with the chores. He hesitated, then handed her a worn rag to polish the bridle leather. Not out of obligation, just so her hands wouldn't be idle, maybe. Idle hands let the past speak too loudly. As they worked side by side, the silence began to take on shape. Not heavy, not empty, just full of things neither of them had said yet. Outside, the wind picked up. The first flakes of snow began to fall with purpose. She broke the quiet first. His name was Clayton Hargrove. Elias didn't stop polishing, though his jaw set a little. She kept her eyes on the leather. He answered my letter, promised a roof, a home. Said he didn't mind that I wasn't untouched. I told him the truth, wrote it plain as I could, what happened, who the father was. But I suppose some men read only what they want to believe. She set the rag down, fingers curling into her skirt. When I got off the train, he looked right through me. Said I was bigger than he expected. Said I tricked him. Then he walked away. Left me on the platform with nothing but cold and shame. Elias's voice came low, almost like he was talking to the horse, not her. He was a coward. Annaliese blinked. The words weren't angry. They were something quieter, a kind of sorrow or maybe understanding. Cowards leave when things stop looking how they imagined. She didn't answer right away. Her throat was tight. The barn creaked as the storm pushed harder against its walls. My pa died when I was 15, she said. Ma followed the next year. Fever. After that, I bounced between distant cousins and pity homes. Folks wanted help, not girls with soft eyes and too many questions. So I learned to be quiet. Learned to keep moving. The baby's father? Gone, she whispered. A kind boy. Poor. Farmhand. We made a mistake one night. I thought maybe love would come after, but he died before spring came. I never even told him. She folded her hands over her belly. It rose and fell slowly under the coat. You ever lose someone, Elias? He paused, then nodded. My younger brother. Last March. Fever took him too. He used to talk enough for both of us. After he passed, the place got louder somehow. Like grief echoed more than laughter ever did. The barn settled into quiet again. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the air warmed, not from the stove alone, but from something else. A closeness unspoken, but growing. She looked at him. Did you write those letters? He didn't ask how she knew. Tried, he said. Every winter, I tell myself I'll send one come spring. Mail order bride, they call it. Sounds like buying shoes. I never could stomach the thought of picking a woman out of a catalog. But I was lonely and tired. And I don't know. I wanted someone who'd choose to stay. Annaliese's eyes softened. You're kind, Elias. But lonely people don't always choose wisely. I didn't. Maybe, he said. But you survived it. That says more than most. She touched the edge of the blanket with careful fingers. When he left me, I felt something crack inside. Like I wasn't a woman anymore. Just a body too full of need. I thought I'd die out there. I really did. You didn't, he said. She looked at him, then really looked. His face was plain, strong. Not handsome in a showy way, but dependable. The kind of man whose silence meant something. Why didn't you wake me that first morning? You were sleeping, he said simply. Thought you might need it more than I did. She smiled. It was faint but real. The kind of smile that hadn't touched her lips in too long. That night, he made stew. Let her sit by the stove in the cabin. He didn't hover, didn't stare. Just sat across from her with his hands curled around a tin mug and eyes steady on the fire. When she coughed, he handed her a handkerchief. When she winced, he asked if she needed a better pillow. She declined. She wasn't used to softness. Didn't trust it yet. Still, she didn't want to leave. The storm howled louder, but inside the little cabin, there was quiet. He glanced at her once, and something passed between them. Something wordless, warm, and fragile as the steam rising between their cups. Outside, the world had turned white. Inside, something had begun to grow. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the beginning of trust. And sometimes that was even rarer. The storm did not let up. It thickened like grief, slow and smothering, until the world outside the barn vanished in white. Time softened with it. Hours blurred at the edges, marked only by the creak of wood, the hiss of a stove, and the faint, steady rhythm of two people learning how not to flinch in each other's presence. Elias mended what he could. He repaired the gate latch, boiled coffee twice, shoveled a path between cabin and barn that the snow filled in before evening. But mostly he watched. Not openly, not intrusively, just enough to remember the sound of her breathing and the quiet way she endured each day. Annaliese moved differently now. Not fearfully, but with that careful grace only women who've had to earn their safety know. She took to folding things, blankets, dish towels, the edges of thought, and her hands were always busy. Once, she offered to sew the rip in his coat. He gave it over, without words, and watched her fingers work, quick and neat, as though mending a stranger's burden was as ordinary as buttoning a cuff. He didn't ask questions. She didn't tell stories. But something passed between them in the way they shared silence. It was not absence, it was communion. A truce without terms. That night, the wind screamed. Not sang, not whispered, screamed. It clawed at the roof, like a thing desperate to be let in. Elias stood by the stove, feeding it slivers of wood, when he heard her cough. A short, sharp sound that made him move. He found her sitting upright in the loft, arms wrapped around her belly, face pale. Not from fever, from memory. He climbed the ladder, each step deliberate, and crouched beside her. Is it pain? She shook her head, but didn't speak. Not at first. He sat with her, back pressed against a beam, knees drawn up like a boy. The storm growled outside. In the stillness between gusts, she said, I've never felt safe with a man. Not really. Elias said nothing. Clayton wasn't the first to turn away. Just the last. Before him, there was a teacher who said I had a poet's soul and hands made for comfort. He married someone else when her dowry came through. And before him was hunger. The kind that makes you take things that feel like love just because they're warm for a little while. She looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly. And now this child. I don't know how to bring something into the world when I don't trust it yet. Elias let the words sit. Let them settle around them like snow that wouldn't melt. Then he said, soft as ash, You're not alone anymore. She turned her head. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but her gaze was clear. I don't want pity. You won't get it from me. A long silence. Then, why are you here, Elias? He considered that for a while. Because I had a brother once who was better than me in every way. He could talk the bark off trees. Made folks laugh even when the well ran dry. When he died, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I didn't know how to fall apart when no one was watching. He paused. Now the land's too quiet. The work too long. I thought if someone came, maybe the silence would shrink. She watched him. Not like she was trying to measure him, just like she saw him. Whole and simple. And not wanting to turn away. Elias leaned forward then, elbows on his knees. I don't need a wife to do my washing or warm my bed. I need someone who knows how to stay even when the storms come. Her breath hitched. That's asking a lot of a woman who was told she was too much. Maybe. But I don't see too much. I see someone still standing. She looked away, tears not falling but gathering, like they were waiting for permission. He shifted, reaching into his coat pocket. Drew out the Bible his mother had given him when he turned 20. The leather cracked, the pages thin as moth wings. He held it in both hands like something alive. Storm still strong. Won't be clearing by dawn. No sense sending you back into it. She said nothing. He opened the book to the family page. Blank. No names written there, but his own. You don't owe me anything. You can stay here as long as you need, and I'll ask nothing in return. She looked at him, mouth parted, unsure. But, he continued, if you wanted a name for you and that child, if you wanted to write it down here before the sun comes up, I'd stand with you. Not for show. Not for rescue. Just because I believe you deserve something that can't be taken back. Annaliese stared at the Bible. Her lip quivered. No preacher. No papers. Just the fire and our names. That's enough for me, he said. Her fingers moved to her belly. Then to the page. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She only nodded once, and it was the most powerful thing he'd ever seen. He handed her the pencil. She paused before writing. What's your mother's name? Susanna. Then maybe the child will carry that too. He didn't answer. Couldn't. She wrote her name first, Annaliese Ruth. Then she passed the pencil to him. He wrote beside her, slow and sure. Elias Matthew Dunn. The fire crackled below. The storm raged outside. But inside the barn, something holy had bloomed. She leaned into his shoulder when she finished. He didn't move, didn't breathe too loud. Just let her rest there, safe and chosen. And before the light crept in, before the frost began to melt from the rafters, he asked her name again, not because he'd forgotten, but because he wanted to hear her say it with the weight of belonging. She said it, soft but steady. Annaliese Dunn. And the storm, for the first time in 3 days, began to quiet. The thaw came slow, like forgiveness. First in the sound of water trickling beneath snowbanks, then in the soft give of earth beneath Elias's boots. The storm had left the world hushed and pale, but something had shifted beneath it all, something alive again. The wind no longer carried warning. Now it carried word. Annaliese moved through the days like she belonged to them. She swept the cabin floor in slow, deliberate arcs, pausing often to rest a hand on her belly. She boiled herbs Elias hadn't thought useful, hung bundles of dried mint and lavender near the hearth, taught the mule not to shy when touched. She never asked for anything. Still, Elias brought her little things without comment. A better comb, a shawl he found buried in a trunk, a book with faded scripture and soft pressed petals inside. They did not speak often of the night they wrote their names in the Bible. There had been no preacher, no neighbors as witness. But it sat on the table now, open to the page where their handwriting met. A quiet vow, an honest one. Then the first letter arrived, brought by May Stover's boy, who ran messages between homesteads when the road cleared. He stood awkward on the porch, clutching a folded note in mittened hands. "It's from Miss May," he muttered. "She says to bring you sassafras and soap root if you need it. Also says she's heard stories. Said to tell you she don't judge what grows in a barn if it grows good." Elias thanked him with a nod and a biscuit. When the boy left, Elias handed the note to Annaliese. She opened it slow, reading each line twice. "She says she remembers me," she whispered. "From the station." Elias watched her face, saw the color rise in her cheeks. Not from shame, hope. She offered to send cloth for the baby. Says she can't see worth a damn anymore, but can still thread a needle by feel. Over the next days, more letters came. One from a preacher's wife who remembered Annaliese's voice from church once, called it the kind of voice that sings even when it speaks. Another from a widow who'd lost 3 children before the war and said she understood what it meant to walk with sorrow as your only companion. Most didn't ask questions. Most didn't offer judgment. They offered bread recipes, scraps of wool, warnings about the doctor in town who overcharged. Elias watched Annaliese read each one with the same quiet awe a starving girl might reserve for a table laid with food. Her hands trembled less after that. But the kindness of women couldn't silence the men. It was a Tuesday when Elias took the wagon to town for feed and flour. Annaliese stayed behind, swollen with child and warm in the quilt May had sent. She told him to be quick and not let the mule cheat him at the way station. He left with the sound of her laughter tucked beneath his ribs. Town was half mud, half rumor. At the mercantile, the shopkeeper's wife handed him a sack of sugar with a look that lingered too long. "You're sheltering a woman, I hear," she said, voice dipped in syrup and spite. Elias didn't answer. "I suppose every man's entitled to his mistakes," she added, folding brown paper around tins with slow disdain. He paid and left without a word. Outside, the street was slush, horses pawing impatiently. That's when he saw him, Clayton Hargrove. Leaner than memory, dressed sharp, eyes like frostbite. He stood near the post office, laughing with the mayor's son, until his gaze found Elias. The laughter stopped. Clayton crossed the muddy street like a man rehearsing every step. His boots splashed up filth, but his smile never faltered. "Didn't expect to see you playing house, Dunn," he said. "Least of all with that one." Elias adjusted the sack on his shoulder. "Best keep walking." "Or what?" Clayton sneered. "You'll hit me with a bag of flour?" Behind him, townsfolk watched. Some leaned out from porches. Others pretended to inspect apples and rifles. The whole street seemed to lean forward, waiting. Clayton stepped closer, close enough to smell the drink on his breath. "She's carrying another man's shame. Don't matter if you dress it in wool and scripture. Still ain't yours." Elias didn't lift a fist. Didn't need to. "She's mine now," he said. "And if you knew the first thing about what that means, you'd keep her name out of your mouth." Clayton laughed, a thin, sour sound. "That ain't how the world works, Dunn." "Then let the world burn," Elias said, and turned away. He came home with his jaw tight, hands raw from a cold. Annaliese met him at the door, helped him carry in the supplies without asking what had happened. She knew. She could always tell by the way he moved. Later, while she shelled beans by lamplight, he spoke. He was in town. Said some things. I didn't answer much. She didn't stop shelling. He say my name? He nodded. She smiled faintly. Good. Let it sit on his tongue like a stone. In the following days, the letters came slower. Some kind. Some curious. A few sharp-edged, folded crisp like judgments. One called her unholy. Another said the baby would be born in confusion. Annaliese read them all, burned only the ones that refused to spell her name right. Elias built her a writing desk from old barnwood, placed it near the window. She began to write letters back. To May, to the preacher's wife, to a girl named Ellie who said she'd also been promised, then left. Annaliese's handwriting grew steadier with each reply. She no longer folded herself small. She walked the property in a shawl, talked to the baby as she fed the chickens, named the tallest pine on the hill after her father, braided her hair in the mornings, humming. One evening, as they sat on the porch, she said, I want the child to carry your name not because I need it, but because you never made me earn it. Elias looked at her, the woman who had arrived in his barn like a question, and turned herself into an answer. He said, You were never a debt to repay, just a life I didn't know I was waiting for. She reached for his hand, resting it over her belly. Then let her know what kindness feels like from the very start. The sun bled out behind the hills, casting the prairie in gold and lavender. A bird sang somewhere, its voice sharp against the hush. They didn't speak again for a while. They didn't need to. The world could keep sending its letters, its warnings, its cruel little verdicts. But the house had grown full of light, of warmth, of names no longer hidden. And Annaliese, no longer someone left behind, had begun to bloom. The fire started just after sundown. The sky still held a smear of color, dusky orange and bruised plum, when Elias smelled it. Not the clean smoke of a hearth or the tang of pipe tobacco, but something harsher, something wrong, acrid and fast. He dropped the feed bucket and turned toward the barn. The roof glowed, a red, trembling light pulsed from beneath the eaves like the breath of something alive and furious. Smoke poured through the slats. Sparks cracked and leapt skyward, carried by the wind like startled birds. Annaliese, he called, already running. But she was at the door, eyes wide, shawl wrapped tight around her belly. Behind her, the lamp cast a long shadow, stretching her figure until she looked twice her size. Half woman, half storm survivor. It's the barn, she said, her voice too calm. I know. They moved fast, like they trained for it. Elias grabbed the pail and ran for the well. She brought wet burlap, wrapping her face, coughing as the wind shifted. The fire was climbing now, licking up the dry timbers with greedy tongues. Inside the barn were the mule, the chickens, the hay she'd gathered. But none of that was what made Elias curse under his breath. There, near the door, half buried under spare tarps and crates, was the wool blanket. Her blanket. The one she'd slept in that first night, half frozen and too proud to ask for anything. He ran toward it like a man chasing something irreplaceable. Smoke blinded him. His lungs seized, barked hard against his ribs, but he didn't stop. Flames hissed and leaned in, as if they knew what he wanted and meant to keep it from him. Still, he reached the crate, kicked it aside, and yanked the blanket free. It was singed at the edges, but whole. He stumbled back just as a beam above gave way with a scream. Annaliese's cry pierced through the fire's roar. She was near the barn door now, face pale beneath ash and fear, hands pressed to her belly as if holding the child steady. He staggered toward her, blanket clutched to his chest, smoke pouring from his clothes. She met him halfway, took his arm, dragged him to rest. They collapsed together near the water trough. She was shaking. He was coughing. Around them, the barn groaned one final time and collapsed inward in a storm of embers. They sat in the dirt and watched it burn, not with horror, not with helplessness, just with the quiet knowing of people who had already survived worse. I should have known, Elias rasped at last. He wouldn't let us be. Annaliese didn't ask who. She knew. Clayton. She'd seen him weeks ago, loitering near the blacksmith, face shaded beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He hadn't approached her then, just watched. But his stare had the chill of a man who couldn't stand being replaced. She should have told Elias. She hadn't wanted to give Clayton space in their lives again. "I'll go to the sheriff," Elias said, still catching his breath. "We'll press charges. Witnesses saw him near town." "No," Annaliese said softly. He looked at her. "I want it to end here. Not with the law. Not with another man fighting another man. Let the barn burn. Let it be the last thing he takes." Elias held the blanket tighter. "He doesn't get to decide what's lost." "No," she said. "We do." They rebuilt slowly. Neighbors came, some with buckets, others with nails and planks. May sent more letters. The preacher's wife brought stew and 3 pairs of infant socks knitted by hand. The mule survived. The chickens scattered but returned. Life, persistent and unpolished, resumed. But something in Elias had changed. He no longer moved with caution. He stood straighter when folks passed. He spoke Annaliese's name out loud, without shame, and when someone whispered behind him at church, he turned and met their gaze until they looked away. The sheriff came once. Said Clayton had been found passed out drunk near the river, boots wet, hair singed. Claimed he'd fallen asleep smoking. The sheriff didn't press. Elias didn't push. Some truths didn't need carving. They just sat in the open, plain as sky. A week later, the baby came. It was a rough birth. Long Annaliese's cries twisted through the cabin like wind before a twister. Elias held her hand, wiped her brow, whispered prayers he hadn't spoken since his brother died. When the child arrived, silent and blue, Elias felt his heart freeze. But then a wail, strong and high and furious. A girl. He fell to his knees beside the bed and wept. Annaliese, pale and spent, smiled at him with cracked lips. "She's got your eyes," she said. "She ain't of my blood." "She's yours," Annaliese whispered, "because you stayed." They named her Susanna, and the first thing Elias wrapped her in was the old wool blanket, still smelling faintly of smoke, of winter, of survival. Years passed. The land healed. The barn was rebuilt, stronger this time, and with more windows. Annaliese planted lavender near the porch. Susanna grew into a fierce little thing who demanded stories every night and stomped through puddles like she owned the sky. One evening, Elias sat alone on the steps while the sun bled gold across the prairie. He held the old Bible on his lap, the page still bearing 2 names written in different hands. Wind swept over the hills, soft and steady, and he didn't flinch at the sound. Annaliese joined him, babe in arms, her hair long now, streaked with silver in the right light. She rested her head against his shoulder. "Ever think we'd end up here?" she murmured. "No," he said, "but I thank God we did." She kissed his cheek, then the baby's head, then turned toward the horizon. And Elias, who once thought love was a thing best left to others, watched his wife and child in the last light of day and understood something he never had before. What a man saves when he chooses to stay isn't land or pride or legacy. It's them. And sometimes, if he's lucky, they save him right back.